So 100 years ago, it was a professor at King's College London who was in charge of the various committees that were trying to work out how to memorialise Shakespeare for the tercentenary of Shakespeare's death. A very large and elegant book that Oxford University Press published called A Book of Homage to Shakespeare 1916, which was edited by Gollancz and included 166 contributions from all over the world. It was, in a way, the beginning of global Shakespeare. This was a book that was full of contributions from right across the world in multiple languages. What's interesting is that Gollancz translated some of the languages and not others. So it's clear that he had to translate Sanskrit and Icelandic and Russian. But he didn't translate Latin, French or Italian because he assumed his imagined reader could read those languages. What's fascinating about the Book of Homage is that it is quite other than as it has been imagined by critics for quite a long time. It's often been treated as a document of imperialism, as a document using Shakespeare to celebrate empire. And Gollancz certainly, for public pronouncements, was very patriotic and appeared to be largely imperialistic. His private correspondence marks something quite different from that. And he always spoke, whenever he had an opportunity to give a speech about Shakespeare, about the tercentenary, he always spoke in international terms, in global terms, what we'd call global terms. And there are some fascinating contributions to the Book of Homage that don't fit with a comfortable establishment sense of what Shakespeare is. A couple of good instances. There's a contribution from an Irish writer called Douglas Hyde, who later became president of the Irish Republic, and he has a poem in Gaelic. If you look at the Gaelic verse and the English translation, there are places where the English translation seems oddly brief. And that's because when you translate the Gaelic fully, it's not very polite to England. And Gollancz had to be a little diplomatic about negotiating that. But if you were a Gaelic reader, you would have a field day reading this stuff. It would be highly amusing to see this material in the middle of what otherwise looked like a grand celebration of England's best poet. There's another truly fascinating contribution, the only one where the contributor isn't named. It's simply called A South African's Homage. And it was by a writer called Solomon Plaiki, who was an early ANC activist and was in London with a political delegation trying to get the British government to lobby against some of the really, oppressive elements of the emerging apartheid system at that point. And Gollancz seems to have befriended Plaiki, and Plaiki has this extraordinary contribution to the volume in which he manages to compare some South African chiefs who'd recently died to the King of England who'd recently died in ways that are funny and gently subversive all at once. So it's a fascinating volume. It has far more to it than meets the eye initially. It both gives you a sense of the establishment state of play in thinking about Shakespeare in 1916 and a sense of what was to come, namely global Shakespeare, that sense of Shakespeare being owned by the world and not anymore simply by Britain and the Empire.